This is a brief, very brief lecture to cover the readings assigned for week 10. And specifically, you're just reading one chapter from the data visualization textbook. And I think this is a really good chapter, but I also think a lot of what it introduces is kind of self-explanatory. And the authors do a very good job providing examples to illustrate their concepts. They even go so far as to give you a step-by-step walkthrough of how you might declutter a particular visual that you've designed. So for all those reasons, I am keeping my lecture extremely brief. And I kind of wanted to say from this point on in the semester, I mean, our reading load is going to be a little bit lighter for one thing. But really, my goal, now that you've all provided a first draft of the capstone project, really my goal for all of the instruction and textbook reading that you do for the rest of the semester is just to use what you're learning in the readings and in the lectures to move ahead with refining your capstone project so that by the time you get to the end, you can have the best product possible. So, cognitive load and overload seems to be the most important theme in this chapter. To get us started thinking about this concept, I've included an image of signage in a train station. I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience of arriving in a new city or country, and it can feel so overwhelming to navigate everything, even the most basic functions like how to buy a ticket for the train system. Clear, effective signage can make all the difference. And even though it's a different context, I think imagining that feeling is a good way to put yourself in the shoes of the different kinds of readers that are going to be trying to navigate and take meaning away from the reports that you're writing for this class. By reducing the cognitive load, you draw attention to the data and the story you want to tell about that data, rather than distracting your audience by causing their minds to move in too many different directions at once. This slide provides an overview of the kinds of advice that your textbook offers on how to achieve this goal. I really like the concept of decluttering as it's introduced in this chapter, and I really can't repeat this piece of advice enough. Brain power is a finite resource. Use it wisely. This is so applicable to so many endeavors that involve human beings. And as for Gestalt principles, I've always found these a bit too formulaic and abstract to apply them in my own documents, but they're interesting nonetheless, and I think this textbook does a good job explaining them. So if you can find something useful there, then you should definitely go ahead and apply it. On the topic of visual clutter, your textbook identifies 4 main types as introduced on this slide. Again, I think they offer excellent examples in the textbook, and I encourage you to start applying these principles to the visuals that you're designing for your own reports. In closing, I'd like to share some of my reflections on the draft reports that I've read so far. And by the way, I'm about halfway through these, but I decided I'm going to finish them up over the weekend, and then I'll give them back to you all at once with my detailed comments. My main comment is to make sure you remember your goal in this class is to produce a professional report written for the audience and purpose that you specified in your initial proposal. This is different from an academic article, both in form and content, and I encourage you to keep that in mind as you continue developing the initial drafts that I'm reading now. This slide gives a visual example. The image on the left is a published academic article, and the one on the right is a professional report. So I wanted to leave you with some more specific comments. These are kind of general overview comments that I've taken away as I've been reading your draft report so far. First of all, just a reminder, and this is stated in the assignment guidelines, but you really want to opt for single spacing throughout the report, not double spacing. And typically in a professional report, you're not going to indent the first line of every paragraph like you do in academic writing. Second, I encourage you to think about the lit review. And so far, what I've read, you've all done a pretty good job writing a lit review that would be appropriate for an academic article. But I really encourage you to think about how that lit review might be different, both in structure and in content, for the reader who's a professional that we all designated as our audiences at the beginning of the semester. So along those lines, I think you might consider visual elements like subheadings and bullet lists, even especially in a lengthy section like the lit review. Give your readers a chance to give their eyes a break. Anticipate that some readers in a professional setting might be skimming this document rather than reading every word of it. So I'm not really going to encourage anyone to cut back on the amount of content because, having a very rich and robust literature review is a good thing. But think a lot about how you might structure that content and package it differently when you're assuming a professional reader rather than an academic reader. And, this is not to imply that professional readers are the only ones who are busy, because academic readers are busy too. But there is a different set of expectations in a workplace document that, large groups of people do need to be able to consult your document and take away content really quickly, which is not necessarily the assumption in the academic setting, where we do expect a more thorough and comprehensive reading from our audiences. Next, I would consider adding an executive summary. I guess I didn't state this in my assignment guidelines, which is probably kind of an oversight on my part. But given everything we've talked about how readers navigate these documents, I would encourage you to write an executive summary, although you probably do want to wait until the end, until you have a complete draft of the report, because that is when you will know what you should say in that document. Next, watch out for paragraphs that provide a lot of numbers. If you're finding yourself writing a paragraph that, presents one number after another, especially larger numbers, consider how much easier it might be for your readers to put that in a table, put those numbers in a table or a graph, something that either accompanies the lengthy text or replaces that lengthy text. Next, make sure you consult some of the examples of professional reports. Over the last several weeks, I've tried to provide in Blackboard some examples of different kinds of professional reports that I think are effective. So you might consider using those as models. And then finally, it occurred to me as I finished reading the textbook chapter and then I was reading your reports, which at this point are still pretty text heavy, that really a lot of these points that the textbook chapter makes about cognitive load and decluttering and all of that really apply just as equally to the textual elements in your report as they do to the visuals that you specifically design to present data. So, I'll leave you with that last closing thought is really, as you continue developing these reports, I want you to think of the text and the visuals as seamlessly weaving together in a compelling narrative. And it just so happens that we're focusing on data visualization right now in the readings and lectures, but all of this advice that we're learning about good storytelling, clear navigation, decluttering, reducing cognitive load, all of that really applies to the document as a whole, not just to those visual elements. And everything really needs to weave together seamlessly. And, we're early in the process, so I didn't expect this all to come together in these drafts right now. But these are the pieces of advice that I'm giving you as you move forward in finishing those drafts and bringing them to the final version. So that is it for the Week 10 lecture. I hope you all have a great week. And I look forward to seeing what you come up with in our discussion forum this week, which is going to be sort of a brainstorming activity to help you think about designing some of your visuals for the report.